Okay, I gotta be on this side of the screen. Yes. So this is about me. My name is Irwin, and I enjoy blogging. This is my site for blogging. You can get hold of me on my Twitter handle, and repository and codes will all be placed at my GitHub repository Irwin-S. So, what we want to discuss today is infrastructure operation validation. What's on the agenda? Why operation validation and the benefits? And for those of you who doesn't know about Pester in the meantime, everyone knows about Pester, huh? But just if you're not really up to speed with it, we're just going to do just enough Pester for operation validation to get you going. We're also going to dive into writing operation validation tests. And instead of just talking about it, we're going to do a lot of demos to get you feeling about it, right? After that, we have some comments. So, why operation validation? So, I think the reason ops guys really have a hard time trying to grasp what it is that we like to get things done, right? And writing tests is all about refactoring your code and make sure that the one that is going to re-update your code knows what is going on. I actually got a great tip from a developer, is that if there's a bug somewhere in your code, the best thing to do is create a test, so that way you have it documented, and the next time it pops up, you know how to validate and go about fixing it. So, actually, when I started out with Pester, this is me. I wanted to do the whole developer feeling about it, but also me is use it solely for operation validation. When I started out with it, I really thought, well, this is one tool that's not really going to be in my toolbox. And then I saw Kevin Mackett do operation validation with Pester. It's like, wait, you can do that? And that really changed things for me. So, why use operation validation tests? Well, for first, there's no more eyeballing the expected results. As a dev guy, as an ops guy, you know, we're doing a lot of deployment. You probably create an account in Active Directory, but you want to make sure that the properties are as expected. So what you would usually do is just have like a subset, you test it, and if it's good, I just make the assumption that the rest is okay. But you know what they say, assumptions is the mother of all? Exactly. So instead of eyeballing the results, just make sure that you have operation validation test, and that way you know for sure it is as expected. Now, if possible, use the source input to automate the process. So I'm hoping that what you're using to automate your process, you have a valid input file. Think CSV, XML, JSON, take your pick. I'm assuming that you're automating your processes, right? And then verify your operational functionality. So think of it as you're going to take an environment in production. One of the things that I really enjoyed was using validation for your Active Directory. Make sure that my sites, my subnets, my site links, organization units are in place. Actually, I wasn't in the team that was doing the deployment, but I created a few scripts because I knew what the input was supposed to be. And I could report to them, hey, guys, I see that you're missing a certain subnet and site link. And they were like, how do you know that? And then I report the next day, well, it's up and running now. And it's like, what are you doing? Are you just shadowing us? It's not, I just created a script, and I can validate all that stuff. So, just enough Pester. What I'd like to do right now is just describe the Pester that you need, information, just to get going, right? So if you're not familiar with Pester, as a quick rundown to just get you up to speed. When you start out with Pester, the first thing you're going to do is create a describe block. And then there's a context block. Depending on the version, you can have multiple sub-contexts as well. And where the magic happens is really with the it block. That's where the assertions take place. But there's also a possibility to do setup with the before and after, or breakdown. You can do that with those sets of the block to get information set up. Now, for the assertions, there's quite a bit assertions that you can use, right? But the should and the operators, mainly for validation, would all boil down to just using the be. But depending on what you want to validate, you could use be exactly or be less than or be more than. There are just some other options that you can use. Uh, Test cases are really interesting for when you're refactoring your code. You want to have a set of cases that you can use to validate that there's an error, and you also want to use that same test case to validate that you fixed it. So actually, if you want to have more information about Pester and finding that information, you can go to the wiki page on GitHub from the Pester guys, and there's also a book by Adam Bertram, the Pester book, and it has a really good information as how to get along and how to start with uh, using Pester for your developing and refactoring of your code. So for the demo, I created a module, and what we're going to do now is go into it and do onboarding of a customer in Active Directory. We're going to create default organization units and groups, and create default folders, and also create them in DFS. Then we're going to onboard some customer users in the organization unit. We're going to validate the users. We're going to update users and see what you can do with it. There are a few tricks that I learned, a few things that I did with Pester to validate. There was well, I'll get into it later on. And offboarding a customer in Active Directory. So we're going to delete the organization unit and all Active Directory objects, and delete the folders. So now it's time for some code. Let's see. How small is it? Okay. Yes? All right. So for onboarding a customer, like I said, I created a module. The module will be available. You can download it, and you can also play along with it if you want to play along with it. There's also shameful advertisement. I did get a chance to write about this in the PowerShell conference book, which is really a pretty awesome book. There's just more to it. There's really a lot of solid content. So if you get a chance to support the guys, definitely pick up an electronic copy of it. You won't be disappointed. Adam Murray also did a session, and that was really, really amazing. So what I'd like to do now is create an organization unit, a customer with a customer name, customer code, and a ticket number. So just to give you an impression as what's going on. For this session, I decided to use verbose just to show you what's going on under the hood. So we're creating organization units, giving information, we're creating groups, and we're adding groups to certain default security groups, right? Now for the fun part, running the onboard operation validation test. Okay. So there are certain default groups that I created. I'm verifying that the organization unit exists, all of the default organizations that I expected. And I'm verifying that the security groups exist, and that the scopes are valid. Some are global, but there's one group that needed to be universal. And I'm also looking into the default global security group memberships. Sometimes you will run a script to add a member and something just didn't go right, so you don't have to worry about, is he a member? Yes or no? You can run this script. You can take away a user member from the group, run it again, and just make sure that it is as expected, right? That's really the fun part of onboarding a user. Now, onboarding the customer folders, there's a default for creating the folder structure. So I processed the folder, create a folder structure, and in the meantime also did some security editing the access control list, the ACE entries, what you would get right now if you look at the folder structure is that he also created a DFS link, but in the DFS link he also created the necessary folders and everything in it. And just like onboarding in Active Directory, we can also test. So testing is really, doesn't have to be difficult. For the folder structure, what I want to do is verify that the folder data exists, apps, profiles, and homes. And I'm also verifying that the DFS link has been created. Like I said, testing is, you should make sure that when you test, your test should also fail. But this really just makes it easier to validate that it is as expected. Now, that's the part of onboarding, but we can also offboard a user. And with offboarding a user, the first thing that I would do is for offboarding, what I did was create an XML file, export with CLI XML. And I'm exporting the users, the groups, the DFS Active Directory object, and the OUs into a specific file. And that file came in real handy. I'm kind of paranoid when it comes to deleting things in Active Directory. I just want to make sure that everything is as expected, and I can probably reproduce it, because once you destroy an Active Directory and you want to restore, he will restore the object, but it's going to be a different ID, and you're also going to have all of your memberships won't be there. So you need some way to at least reproduce what was going on. Now for the testing, that was really an interesting exercise, because testing that the Active Directory object doesn't exist isn't enough. Maybe you made a typo, but lucky for us, there's in the query, you can add deleted objects. So what I wanted to do is look at the deleted object and make sure that it has been deleted. So the object class is a group. I'm looking into the object ID, the GUID. So it is as expected, and I can actually validate that the security group has been deleted. We look into the code. Once I go through all of the presentation, I'll go through the code, how it's been built up. So deleting all of the users, the security groups, the organization units, I can just get rid of everything, but having that export made it just a lot easier to validate that they don't exist anymore, with the right credentials, the right object units, and everything. All right, so that is the routine for onboarding or for offboarding. Same goes for offboarding the folders. Offboarding the folders, I'm going to delete the DFS and folder and delete the target part. And for testing that, well, it's just going to be real easy. I'm just going to validate that the file folder doesn't exist. So the thing is with creating tests, don't make it too difficult. Just keep it simple in certain points. And this is just good enough. All right, so we're going to go through the full, that's the part of the code to onboard and offboard. What I wanted to do was just go through the whole process of onboarding a specific user, organization called Garden Gurus. It's just a fictive customer. And we just onboard the customer. And I'll also show that you can create HTML reports of your validation, onboard the structure, and just get the reports to see what went on. I'm wondering, do I just run everything and go through it? All right, guys, just bear with me. So, creating the user group and run the test. So that's looking good. Now there's also a commandlet that will also run the HTML report. Oh, wait a minute. Did he open up? Oh, so he's not linked to the browser, but he opened it up in Visual Studio Code. That was in the IDE. You know what? Open with Google Chrome. So there's a unit XML file that you can use to generate your report of all of the files, all of the tests that passed or failed. And you have all of your values here. Everything pass percentage, 100%. So that's looking good. In the meantime, we can also onboard our folders. And also test it. Oh, yes. Look into DFS. We can refresh. And there the folder, DFS links, files and folders and structures are as is. Now, the next part that I wanted to do for this session is also onboard some users. Now for that, we're going to use an XML file, and I'm going to use the module import Excel by Duckfink, which is pretty awesome. You don't have to have Excel installed. You can read in the values and validate it. So this was something that I actually ran into doing a migration at a customer. They used the migration tool, and the tool kind of screwed up the properties. So what we did was exported all of the properties of Active Directory. I gave them the Excel sheet. It's like, okay, look into the properties, see which ones need to be set. I'll set the value and then run the script again against it and see what failed. And then I know what failed is what I need to update. So just created all my accounts. I'm also just doing a pass-through just to get a general idea of what's going on with the accounts. So he created accounts in the organization unit, Garden Gurus, users. That's looking good. And what you want to do now is run test and make sure that the properties are as expected. So you're going to get a whole list of properties right there. The fun part is, you can look into the labeling of your test is also valid, right? So you want to have something meaningful. So I'm looking at the user, Apparel 1966, looking at the city, and also looking at the value of it, right? And this is something that we call breadcrumbing. Actually, this is really something that came in handy. You take your information. If it's not set, I'll just return a value of null. Can use this value now. I'm just going to mimic it by changing some properties for demo purposes for 2 users. And then you see what the advantages of using Pester to validate what changed. So I just changed a few properties on the user and verify that the differences exist. Okay? Let me just get rid of that pause. Okay. Oh, when you look at that. Going through the list. So 4 failed of the properties. So looking into that, I noticed that the SAM account, the property surname was expected Branson, and we changed that property, the given name, the surname. It's Jarvis, and the city, we also changed that as well. And the given name we also changed as well. He expected Marlon, but it's Marvin. Now, to correct the user properties, I can use, I have a module of a function that will take the errors that are here and set it, and that way you can run the AD test again and make sure that it is as expected, right? So correcting the properties, I'm setting the user surname, setting to Branson, and I'm also setting the title, setting the city, and setting the giving name. And once you run the test again, I'll be sure to make the list a little bit shorter next time. We don't need to go through all of them. But everything is as expected. So that really the benefit of having Pester test is that you can rerun your test and make sure that if something changed and you're not too sure what changed and it's something different, definitely when you have different admin users in your organization, somebody changed something somewhere and you're like, but I'm certain I placed that and it's that value and someone changed it. No need to get stressed out. You can do an export, save the value, verify it again. Oh, well, yesterday it was this value, but today it's that. You can use it to rectify it, right? Now, and for offboarding, it's pretty much the same what we did with the with offboarding the users. So, just to be thorough with my presentation, I'll run you through it. Exporting the users, and we'll export, test the offboard of the organization unit. Oops. Yes. He's verifying that the users have been deleted, the organization units, and just make sure that you also offboard the folders. And validate that the folders are gone. Right. So that's basically what the code does. I'll just dive into the code to show you what's going on. Let's see, is it the view? What was the selection again? For increasing? Control plus, huh? Yeah. That's good? Okay. So let's just get rid of that. So for onboarding the test, I have actually the commandlet, the function test onboard. And basically that's just a wrapper that will call the operation validation, the new onboard test with all of the properties and parameters, pass it along, and there's an output file that will be exported to onboard and with the output format. And you need to use pass-through to get all of the information back. And using the onboarding results, if the results are equal to 0, then it's successful. I'll process that, and if it failed, I'll tell you exactly how many of the errors are there, and you just know that there's something wrong with your export or with your test. Now, looking into the operation validation, here's the new onboard test. And here's where you go into describing. I have all of the default organization units, the groups, and the universal groups, organization unit names. And you go through the test, describe the customer onboarding, the context for organizing your structure or your organization unit, go through all of the defaults and the assertion. Here it goes that the organization unit exists. I'm looking into the organization distinguished name should be, and then the default customer name. Or verifying the global security name, verifying that the group exists, and verifying what it should be, and also looking into the scope, if it's global or if it's universal. So I just made two different contexts for the global security groups and one for universal. And then going through the group memberships and verifying that for every group. That's a small function that I use to export the values. And once that is in place, I'm going to go through all of the security groups and make sure that they are part of the security group, that they're necessary. And for offboarding, so basically with the onboard test and offboard test, it's just like a template to just call the desired test with the desired parameters on it. And for offboarding the folder, offboard test, I'm using the XML file that we exported. So I'm going to import that. And depending on the process date, I can actually go back and see when I deleted the accounts. Import them, the offboard objects. When you do the filter, include deleted objects. Make sure that you gather all of the information and then go through all of the objects and just have a lookup. I have a lookup key to make sure that I know when it's deleted, has been deleted, the object class, the GUID, the name, and when it's been changed. And just go through all of the information, describe, verifying the organization unit has been deleted, looking at the lookup for the key name, but also looking at the object class and the object GUID. And that way I make sure that I know exactly, because once you start, when I started testing, just validating that the display name or the organization name is, you can have multiple instances with the very same name, but with the GUID, it's unique. So exporting it and using that information to validate that it has been deleted really makes it valid. And for offboarding, onboarding the folders, that is really straight to. Just test the part and make sure that it's true, literal part. And for the DFS link, just test the container part, make sure that it's a folder and it's in place. And for offboarding the folders, just make sure that it's false. So there's no real rocket science to it. It's just make sure that everything is as it should be. Well, let me just... Questions so far with validation? Is there something that you could use when you need to automate processes instead of having the traditional checkbox? Just write a test for it, and you can reuse it again and again. And what I'm seeing a lot now when it comes to pipelines and when it comes to coding, there's a lot that you can do for refactoring, but also for pre-deployment. You can use Pester tests to make sure that everything is as expected. For instance, if you're going to do something with JSON validation, make sure that the files are valid. Just want to test before your pre-deployment, so there are no surprises before you compile or do a build. And you're not midway the process, oh, it failed because the file isn't valid. Yes, precisely. You know, that's the fun part of it. I created in the past a lot of Excel sheets, you know, with all reports, and it's like, okay, well, it's in the Excel sheet, but do they really exist? Oh, let me just look at it. Run the script, yep, they exist. Oh, the properties? I don't know how many times I've had projects that they changed some entry point, or you get different Excel sheets with different versions, and somebody is mad because it's Mrs. or Mr. You had the wrong title. Yeah, so which version did you send me? So I sent you Excel version 1 point, but that wasn't the version that you sent me. I could have sworn that I sent you the right version. Now, there's no more frustration, just run your test. Okay, so this is what it's there. Do I need to change it? You can update it. And run it again, it's like, okay, everything is in place. One of my colleagues, actually what he did was he would delete everything and recreate everything again, which isn't really quite handy if you have group memberships and unique security IDs. That's not really the way to go. All right, so in summary, I guess we're ahead of time. Operation validation is more a mindset of ops guys, right? Uh, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the development part. I had some lively discussions with a lot of guys when it comes to development and for the classes, but that's a different story. Never trust a test that doesn't fail. Definitely, you should have tests. It should fail. Make sure that it's not give you always a positive. And Pester is also for ops, not just devs. Like I said, the mindset of operation validation is for ops. And validation is about testing what is critical or mandatory. So I guess in the beginning, for me, it was also trial and error. What is really critical and what is mandatory, because you can get carried away real easy creating tests that are not going to add value. For instance, for Active Directory, basically what you need is the name and your SAM account. And everything else is not really mandatory, but if it's necessary for some functionality, then it's good to test that. But you decide what adds value and what doesn't. And in the meantime, have fun learning Pester and how to use it for operation validation. So, I guess that was my presentation for today. Questions? No? So, shameful disclosure, these are links of slides that we had to fill in for documentation on Microsoft. They're really quite good when it comes to looking up for information. And Microsoft loves geeks. That's the reason why we're here all together. All right, guys, don't forget to fill out your survey and how we can do it better. And thank you for visiting the site. Okay, I'm done, guys.